Yep. And we'll just wait for a couple more people to join. I'm just going to.
We didn't cover how much time. How long do you want me to chat? I want to make sure everybody's got the.
Oh yeah, I reckon give yourself,
time.
5 minutes or so. We've got a few questions in already, but there might be more that will come in through the chat. So we'll be pretty flexible.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep. Cool. And so I'm going to start with acknowledgement of country that we do here in Australia. So I'd like to acknowledge the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm meeting today, and pay respect to their elders, both past and present. And I extend this respect to all Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander peoples in attendance today. And I encourage you, to anyone who's joining, to please put in your name, your role, and where you might be paying your respects to today, if you're in Australia, or even in the lands that you might be meeting from, if you're from somewhere international. Very welcome to put that in the chat for us. And then I'm actually going to do a little intro for myself. Bree Norton, I'm co-chair of OZeWAI. We are the career kind of progression aspects now of the digital accessibility professionals, which is why we have these Ask the Professionals. We used to run annual conferences. Now we're going to be running more of these ad hoc events. And we also partner with events, which is why we've got a couple of our presenters today. But welcome to everyone joining us. If you haven't already, please check out all the events on the OZeWAI website. And we also have, we put the recordings up there usually within the few days after the event as well. All right, so I might go to our first panelist to do a little introduction. Chris, please, would you like to do an intro and tell us a little bit about the initiative?
Thanks, Bree. Yeah, this is exciting times, and we are about to really, I guess, formally announce standard accessibility reporting being a partner, and OZeWAI being a member of standard accessibility reporting. This is a new initiative that I dreamed up about 5 years ago, but then with the pandemic, everything got delayed. And so we've really only been operating as a business, as a non-profit business in the United States for the last year or so. And in that year, we've grown to a member organization of around about 33 plus member organizations, including IAAP, who you may know, the International Association of Accessibility Professionals, as well as a number of other accessibility testing companies. What we are doing is creating, we are a standards organization. We set ourselves up that way, and we are going to create the equivalent of your sort of nutrition label that you'll find on your cornflakes, but for accessibility. And this will be for accessibility of consumer technology products that you'd find in the home, like washing machines, microwave ovens, thermostats, those types of things. And it'll also be for websites, enterprise software, and apps as well, mobile apps. Because right now, if you're a consumer and you're blind and you go to, say, a museum or something like this, and you want to download their app, or you might have to pay for that app, you have no idea whether it's accessible or not in advance, and nobody's reviewing it, nobody's putting that information out. So what we want to do is put the scoring system together that will tell the consumer whether this app is accessible generally, and then whether this is accessible given their particular type of disability. So that type of thing. So that's what we're doing. We're putting this together. We are in the process of seeking funding to pay for the development of the standards. A lot of networking, a lot of outreach, but within a year or so, we hope to have our first standards out there for anybody to use for free. Yeah.
That's great. Thanks, Chris. Great summary. I might go to, well, we'll go into a little bit more about this initiative as well as we go through the discussion. I might go to Julia now if you'd like to do an intro, Julia.
Yeah, so I'm the conference and events coordinator at GetAboutAble. So GetAboutAble is a social enterprise that is focused on improving travel and leisure opportunities for people with a disability, both as consumers and employees. We work with tourism operators, government bodies, and community organisations to help them become more accessible and inclusive through a range of tailored consulting services like access and inclusion reviews, disability action and inclusion, plan development, staff training programs, digital accessibility content, and our flagship product is the Accessible and Inclusive Tourism Conference, which we help the tourism industry to learn how to cater to and capitalise on the accessible and inclusive tourist market. So there's two main pillars to the conference, and one is obviously the education through conference sessions. But just as important for us is connection. We find, especially with people on their accessible and inclusive journey, that connecting with people who have been on a similar journey, or connecting with experts just helps everybody, really. It helps them, and so we've fostered a community through that.
That's great. Thanks, Julie. And we'll get into more of that shortly. And Rosemary, please, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Rose Allsopp. I run Web Directions conferences, which I run along in a family business with my brother, John Allsopp. John founded the company, and he's a pioneer of the web in many respects, been around forever. And he ran the first web design conference in Australia over 20 years ago. Accessibility is really important to us as an organisation, and also personally to us as a family. We grew up in a family with our aunt was quadriplegic. And so the notion of making things accessible is almost intrinsic to us, although we're not perfect at it. And we've always had content in relation to accessibility at all of our conferences, and it's not a separate part, it's part of the main programs. So we see accessibility as something that should just be part of general digital practice, and not as a nice to have, or we'll just tack this on at the end, as something that's intrinsic to how people should build and develop digital products, and all products really, and even, physical products obviously as well. I think that's, my intro.
No, that's great. Thanks, Rose.
Yes.
And
I forgot to mention. So during COVID, so obviously as a company that was mainly in-person conferences, we had to very rapidly shift to digital delivery. And we have built a purpose-built platform for conference videos before that, and that it did turn into a way to deliver conferences online. And that platform is used by GetAboutAble for their conferences. And there's accessibility that started at the very beginning of that. We talked about how to make this the most accessible thing that we could possibly build, and we do believe it's the most accessible platform for conference videos particularly that exists. We get all of our content transcribed. We get the slides transcribed, and when we moved back to in-person, we included a streaming option, which was never something we did previously. And we do live captioning. We then get those edited when they become proper videos for the platform for consuming later, so that the text and everything is actually real, as opposed to, it's very hard live captioning. It's not that the transcripts are not as good as when you do them afterwards and you edit them. So we do all of that with the goal that everything that we do is as accessible as it possibly be. We're not perfect, and that's fine, but we really do try and make that the center of how we design things and how we deliver things.
That's great, Rose. And I've experienced it myself. We've used it a couple of times for OZeWAI, and we're obviously getting that set up for ourselves as well. So one of the first questions I had here, you've pretty much answered, but I don't know if you want to add anything to it before I go to Chris. Basically, the initiative you're involved in, you've shared about that, which is Web Directions, but how accessibility is important to you. You've kind of covered that. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
Look, I just think it's everyone, you never quite know in life when and what may happen to mean that you require a transcript or you require something to be accessible. And it's I don't think it's innate necessarily for people to think about these first, but it really, yeah, it's just important. Like everyone has examples, but even if it doesn't ever affect you directly, which it will, because everyone's sight gets worse as they get older, it's inevitable, as my optometrist said. But even if it isn't directly impacting you right now, it's something you should just think about. And it's just, we've had a lot of diversity and a lot of different accessibility through illness and through neurodiversity and through physical disability in my family. And it's just like, why would you not want to design things to be that everyone can use them as easily as they can? Like, it seems to be a brainer, but it's I don't know. It doesn't make sense to me why this isn't what people think of first, but yeah.
And it's funny, if a couple of times, you kind of mentioned to people, are you really happy to exclude an audience or people? You're making that decision, that conscious decision to exclude. But Chris, I'll go to you. Your initiative with the standards. How does the accessibility and how important that is to you involved in this new initiative?
Well, we're kind of about how accessibility is important to everybody, like Rosemary just said. And the problem that we have right now is you get a company that strives to be the most accessible it can be, right? And you get another company that is just like barely getting by or just ignoring it.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, you, as the consumer who doesn't work in this field, has no real way of knowing who's winning, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who's doing well at accessibility. And so the problem in terms of this battle that most of us have been waging for decades, working in this field, we've been trying to get companies to change en masse, and there isn't a motivator for them, and we think that the score is going to become the motivator for them. And for the companies that want to say that they're doing well, right now, all they can say is, we're doing all the best we can. We're doing, we're compliant. We consider ourselves A+. Whatever marketing message they want, but there's no way to compare to anybody else. So anyone else can just say, "Oh, we're doing great on accessibility." People on this call might be able to look at their accessibility and say, "No, you're not actually doing great." But until you can give them a score, there's no scoreboard. Yeah, it's like so right now it'd be like going to see, so I did my PhD in Australia. I did it in Melbourne. So it'd be like going to a footy game and St Kilda are B+ and Melbourne are 230. Who's winning?
Yeah.
That's where we are. There is no scoreboard, and it's kind of crazy that we've come this far without it. This is long overdue. But yeah, as in terms of accessibility, it's the heart of everything that we do. We're really just trying to get everybody else to change, and I think that of all the things that could possibly substantially change the way the marketplace is, having scores on things wakes a few people up, I think. Yeah,
that's a good point. And I think that's where our partnership is going to come in handy, because we've already started a similar approach that we've shared with you around our accessible ICT procurement, and calling it a scorecard as well. So we probably we'll be aligning with what you're doing with the standards on that. We encourage our OZeWAI members to also join the standards ARI not-for-profit and be involved in how these standards are developed. Julia, the initiative you're in with GetAboutAble and the 8CAP conference, I was fortunate enough to be there and present this year. It was probably one of the best conferences besides Web Directions. You two are just leading the way. How is accessibility important to you?
Well, basically it's how GetAboutAble came about to begin with. Our founder, Dr. Yasmin Gray, was an avid traveller and then sort of had a disability, so travel got harder and harder. And I also have had a disability since I was really young, so accessibility is important to me because it pretty much affects my everyday life. But with travel in particular, there are just so many barriers, and it's usually so difficult. You've got sort of maybe 50% of people with disability deciding not to travel just because it is too difficult. But there's been statistics, like the market is huge. There's like a $13.5 billion is basically the domestic Australian tourism accessibility market. It's the fastest growing in the visitor economy. But when you go to the Australian Tourism Data Warehouse, less than 30% of businesses there list themselves as accessible. So, you know, you've got this huge, huge market with lots of potential revenue that businesses were just pretty much ignoring. And especially with COVID coming in, you know, all the businesses suffered. So it's been really interesting because I've been working with GetAboutAble since probably the start of 2021. And so that was my first step into the tourism industry. And the shift in the last 6 months compared to the last 2 years, it's been really interesting that the momentum is finally built in. And as we know, when you make something accessible, it makes it easier for everyone. There was a stat in a Expedia research paper that said, so the second most important factor in choosing a travel brand to plan and book after, you know, best prices is easy use of website. And as we know, it's often one of the first steps people need to do.
That's actually a really good point. And I think it comes to one of the questions in here is from Jock about auditing and understanding auditing. So, you know, I guess from that point of view for, you know, tourism and travel organizations who have their websites, you know, what would be a good way of assessing a budget or a, you know, a kind of an assessment approach? Chris, I might go to you for that question, and then we'll come back to Rosemary to start the next one that we've got on the list as well.
Yes, so go ahead.
This network wants, you have to consider what is happening out.
I think we've got someone. Joe, are you okay if I mute you? Got some background noise, I think. Okay, go, Chris.
Yeah, sorry, I was reading the question that was on the chat. So were you wanting me to respond to the question in the chat or something else?
Well, I think Jock put a long detail in there. I think if we summarize it, Jock, if you're comfortable in basically how would a business do an audit and budget for an audit of some kind?
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. So auditing is actually quite easy in that you're looking for patterns of behavior of the people who are doing authoring. So that's what an audit is really doing. So usually if you're looking at a website, and so I know your question is about cognitive disabilities, but if you're looking at a website and you're looking for visual issues and violations of WCAG, and you'll pretty quickly see a pattern as to whether the people who developed this website knew anything about accessibility or not.
Yeah.
Right. So you're either finding very, very few problems, quite a few problems, or just a ton of problems all over. And that sort of gives you an idea. And then you go back. Usually you go back to the client and you say, look, there's no need to go through the entire site. I know what your problem is now, right? So in terms of an audit about that, if you know what the rules are, what the content should be and how it should be created, and you're looking for, you know, how is this working? 5 pages, 10 pages, even if there's 10,000 pages to check, because the problem will be endemic across the board, usually.
Yeah, no, so that's exactly right. You tend to group some of the aspects that you can see. You know, maybe you might just check a template or a regular page. So if it's a WordPress site, you check similar posts that have similar things on it. You might just check things like your video, if there's videos and things like that. So yeah, I definitely agree with that. Well answered. Jock, I hope that answers your question there. I'm not too sure about the budget aspect. I think some of the accessibility companies that we have on our consultant directory, maybe you could reach out to them and see kind of what they would quote for an audit, and you could go from there. Anything else you'd wanted to add to that,
Yes.
Chris, or anyone else on the
Well,
panel?
So it really depends on what the company wants to do. There's two basic models of approach that companies have, and an accessibility company has, right? So there's a break fix and a shift left. Okay, so break fix is company comes to you and says, we've got all this content and it's not accessible. I need somebody to fix it for me. You say, well, okay, I could fix it for you, but then when you create new content, the new content is broken. Okay, so I can fix your 10,000 pages. Great. Okay. And you pay me for that. And then when you make another 10,000 pages, call me again and I'll come and fix it for you. Right. So that's the break fix model. And the other model is called shift left. So it's shifting left in the design phase. So thinking about accessibility at the beginning. And it's really saying, look, I've taken a look at your site. There's all these issues. This suggests to me that there's a training issue for your staff on accessibility. Why don't we train your staff on accessibility so that they know how to do this, and then you're in a much better position. Once you get good at that, maybe come back to me and we'll see how we can improve it even further. That's okay.
That's a good point. And I might actually go to Rose then on this, and that's kind of an approach I would say that you would be considering at Web Directions, right? You learn as you go. But you've got it ingrained when you've got someone like John Allsopp, who is, an accessibility advocate as well, and a specialist. How do you do that shift left, Rose?
Yeah, I actually, just building on what Chris said, I mean, I've had a lot of work. I've done a lot of experience in board work and governance outside of Web Directions. And I think it's what you're saying, Chris, is like it's either people view it as compliance or something you should just bake into design for best practice. And it's shifting that mindset from saying, oh, there's a big stick here and I might get in trouble if I don't do this, to how about we start at the beginning and design things so they work for most people? And that's the part that I find interesting. And I think actually the conversation would be so much easier if people were open about, oh, well, I shouldn't say people, but like it shouldn't be being afraid of the big stick or afraid of making a mistake. I think everyone's well-intentioned and most people generally in the world want to do their best work. I don't think most people build things to be inaccessible. This is like there's an absence of knowledge or an absence of seeing it as a value or as being important to invest in at the beginning. So it's for me, in terms of how we can get the best outcomes, and this might be more a meta conversation, is about how do we shift these mindsets and this thinking in organizations as a whole so these things are baked in from the very beginning.
That's a good point. And I think, Julia, there's a question here from Kylie that kind of relates to this. There's a hotel that, they have disability training programs and doing really some wonderful things in the physical environment, but their website is not accessible. I think Kylie's asking how you would approach such an organization to encourage them to improve their digital accessibility. And I think Rose and Chris have both just touched on that. Did you want to add to that?
Yeah, and I think Rose, picking up from what Rose said, is a lot of people just don't realize. So sometimes the best way is just to approach them and go, hey, did you know that, this is not as accessible to this part of the market and you're missing out. I was reading an article the other day that so the value of the click away spend to more barrier-free sites. So if people are on your site, not accessible, they're going to click away. So this is in pounds, 17.1 billion. So you are missing out on money. I mean, it's an easier argument because I was sort of doing a bit of prep for this, and so I was looking up some web accessibility articles, and a lot of the why should you care about accessibility issues all started with lawsuits can be filed against your business. I mean, obviously that's probably a more ADA American thing, but that's not like Rose said, it's don't go with the big stick, because that's frightening people into compliance, and they're not going to. You need to shift their perspective to come at it from it's a customer service approach. It's a you're losing potential revenue approach.
And it's also, just even having understanding that, I mean, even with OZeWAI, we use a third-party plugin for our membership approach. We've put up there, that we're testing it. It has some issues. This is how we get around it. We've got an accessibility statement. So it's actually showing that you're trying and that you're working with those other, and, we have been in touch with the third-party plugin to try and improve it. So I guess it's one of those things that you need to keep trying, don't you?
And this is what we say, sort of, so at GetAboutAble, we say it's a journey. And because I think what overwhelms a lot of people, and this is talking not just web accessibility, but accessibility in general, is people just think it's this overwhelmingly large and expensive project, where realistically, as you will know, Bree, a lot of what came out of the conference this year was, just start.
Just start. Exactly.
Take it one step at a time. Do what they call the low-hanging fruit. Do something small that's low cost. Start having a plan to slowly increase, because, as someone who's lived my life with a disability, we don't expect everything to suddenly be all accessible to everyone, and accessibility requirements are different for different people, even within sometimes the same disability. So, and there are some times when those requirements clash and are not compatible. So yeah, it's about just starting, and progress, not perfection.
I like that, progress, not perfection. It's a really good approach.
That came out of the conference.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yes, Chris, go for it.
I wanted to just respond to that. I get what you're saying. Just start, but if you're brand new to an organization, or you just started a business, right? Maybe you could get a pass on the fact that accessibility needs to be addressed, and it was an oversight before. But you got these companies that have been around, 30, 40, 50 years that still don't do accessibility, and there's no excuse, really. I mean, I know that the legal framework in the US is a little bit more tight than it is in Australia, but still, there are companies in Australia that are striving to do great things, and there's other companies that are just, they're complaining, right? They're complaining, this is extra work. This is something I don't have the budget for, right? And so I recently was just writing a piece for a US government contract and putting out new guidance on how to think about your budget, right? And so there's a term, I don't know if you use this in Australia now, but we have a term called unfunded mandate, right? Is that a term that people throw about there? It means something that the government wants you to do, but they're not putting any money behind it. Anyway. And so people would say, well, it's, Section 508 and this accessibility stuff is an unfunded mandate, and there's all this extra work I've got to do for accessibility, and who's going to pay for it? And I say, well, we've been paying for it for the last 20 years. You build products or you provide services for people. People includes people with disabilities. So that means for the last 20 years, you've been ignoring 20% of the population. So the budget was always there. It's just that you weren't spending it on these folks. So it's not extra money that you need. It's spend your current money more appropriately.
Yeah.
That messaging doesn't always get through. And I think we in the accessibility field need to do a better job of telling people about that, and just say, look, we're not putting up with this anymore. People pleading poverty while making huge profits and saying that this is so hard to do. It's not hard to do. Nobody complains about having to paint the blue paint on a parking lot, right? In a car park for the disabled spots. You know, the team doesn't say, well, who's going to give us the extra money for the blue paint for these wheelchair markings, right? It's all baked in. That's part of the job. And it should be for everything. It's all baked in. It's all part of the job. It's very frustrating.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So,
I was
Rose,
just going
yes.
to point just in the industry itself, which is, relatively new, digital design, digital products, not accessibility as such, but also it's been built on the goodwill of good actors who work in good faith. And all the people who work in accessibility, it's their well intentions, and they've given a lot of free labor and a lot of to these principles. It's now time where trillion-dollar companies, and we have this even in terms of investing in professional development for their staff, which is somewhat vested interest because of our conference. It's time for trillion-dollar industries to start actually investing in these things that are very important, that have relied on good faith actors for 20 years, 25 years, 30 years in the development and design of the web. They've made a lot of money out of it. It's time to invest back. And I agree completely with what you're saying, Chris, is that, it's not acceptable for billion-dollar companies to be like this. And it shouldn't just be reliant on non-profit volunteer people to hold them accountable.
That's a great segue into my next question. And I know that there's a question from Sharon. We'll get to that one. I think it's kind of related. But what do you see as the benefit for your organisation or your initiative in partnering with OZeWAI now and into the future? I might go to you first, Julia.
Yeah, so OZeWAI has been instrumental in helping us get the conference up and running. So the conference actually started during COVID. It was planned for, I believe, 2020. When obviously COVID hit, it couldn't happen. So it was decided it would go ahead virtually. I believe, Bree, you knew Yasmin from many years ago. And so partnering with you guys allowed us to establish a connection with Web Directions. And between Web Directions, expertise in online events, and OZeWAI's expertise in digital accessibility, and GetAboutAble's expertise, we were able to pull all the resources together to create a dedicated platform to host the first conference in 2021 and then again in 2022. I believe that happened in all of 4 months the first time around. So
it did, yeah.
Yeah. And then obviously, all the work we did was shared between all of us, so it can be leveraged by all the organizations. OZeWAI's also shared some of their accessibility funding with us, which has allowed us to increase our accessibility ongoing at the conferences. And we're still continuing to regularly collaborate. I believe we're actually partnering to do some training at the moment. We're always cross-promoting each other. So yeah, I think it's been an essential partnership for us, and I can see that sort of taking on different directions in the future as sort of we grow our business and
No, that's great, Julia. And it's interesting. So Dom's joining us. He's one of our members, our new student members, and is attending Web Directions thanks to OZeWAI and Ability Work. And I think what he's touched on in the chat is that where OZeWAI wants to go is to be the place for careers in digital accessibility for the professionals, to build connections and networks. We couldn't just hold our own conference anymore. We actually need to partner with lots of other organizations to find the people that we're going to need in Australia in the digital accessibility specialist space as those careers grow. So this is one of our key missions as well. So I love the alignment there, and maybe we learn, you know, a lot of these travel companies will, you know, join OZeWAI as digital accessibility professionals and build careers out of them as well. And I think that goes to you, Rose. Would you like to talk about the benefit for the, you know, for web directions in partnering with OZeWAI now and into the future?
Yeah, I think it's really important with the partnership is also the exposure that we can bring with our audience, which is up to 600 people in Sydney coming up at the end of the month, to get exposed to organisations like OZeWAI and GetAboutAble to a certain degree in terms of just the opportunities to have people understand that this should be core part of what they do. And that partnership is beneficial to us also because we are not perfect in what we do. We can say, we really value accessibility, but I believe we ran one of the OZeWAI audits through something that we were doing, and there were a couple of really fundamental things we hadn't done. So everyone can learn and everyone can improve, and that sort of partnership makes it part of daily practice. But also, it's okay if you're not perfect, if you're looking and this is part of what you're trying to achieve. So I think that's one of the values of partnerships and organisations like OZeWAI is that this is something that doesn't have to be scary. It is something that doesn't have to be overwhelming. It's just something that you can learn from others and try and improve. And this is more for organisations. You know, I think Chris's point about the larger organisations, it should be far more regimented, but everyone can learn and everyone can improve. And having sort of the relationship with OZeWAI and then having OZeWAI's relationship with us as well, it just allows it to become more exposed to more people in the industry and hopefully more part of daily practice.
I totally agree. And I think one of the benefits too, we have a booth at Web Directions in October where we have demonstrations of you know, audits or websites. People come up and chat to us. We had a great time last year. And I think one of these examples is so Dom and another student member play a very different fields. One's a UX designer, one's a UX you know, researcher or user interface designer. So they're going to actually touch and meet and network in a different space, you know, with the other, like the product areas and the design areas. So it does give that nice crossover to show that, you know, people from different backgrounds can also get work in all these different areas as well. So really, we really do appreciate that with that booth. And I think it's pretty well, it's pretty quiet when the presentations are on, of course, but in the breaks, it gets quite busy. But Chris, what do you think about the partnership that we're doing? You know, we've discussed with OZeWAI. You know, what do you see the benefit for StandartARI? Oh, I think you're on mute.
Muted. Sorry. I think it's a terrific partnership opportunity. You know, for the fact of geography. That we're based in the US. We have members in Israel and UK and Poland and in Australia as well. And so it's a global problem. A lot of our meetings and our communications and our events are based around the American time span, unfortunately. So for me, it's the evening of the day before for where you are. Okay, so that being said, look, we need to get our message out to OZeWAI's members to say that we exist and this is what we're doing, and you know, you're welcome to come along and participate. And I think for OZeWAI, you know, the invitation for us through this partnership is that the OZeWAI leadership can attend our meetings as well, and find out what is happening, and then, you know, provide input based off of the experience from Australia and from the OZeWAI members. So it's a win-win all around. We are continuing to grow as you are continuing to grow. I know you're sort of morphing into a different type of format for things. I run conferences as well, and you know, we're about to do the ICT Accessibility Testing Symposium in person again, or it really is a hybrid format, but it's in person this year, and the last time we were all in person was 2019. just because of the timing of the pandemic and things like that. So so yeah, it's I think it's a terrific win-win situation. Yeah.
No, that's great. We might go, Chris, to Sharon's question about the scorecard. I'm not sure if you did see that in the chat. Would you like to answer that?
Yeah, so Sharon's asking, you know, how will the scoring happen? How will the score be achieved? Is there a testing measure or process to follow? There will be. We have to develop it. So when we started this process, we knew, I mentioned before, this is a long time overdue, creating some sort of scoring system for accessibility of products and websites. People have tried this before, and they've tried it and failed. And one of the problems that happened was that people tried this unilaterally. You know, a company or an accessibility company might say, we can create a score, and we'll create a score and every scoring system, and everyone will just rally around it, and we'll be famous and rich. You know, it's like, well, no, never happens. You need to get agreement amongst the field. If you're going to create a scoring system, you need to know all the disability organizations think it's a good thing. Because if you publish it without their participation, they'll probably say, we weren't involved. We don't believe in this because we weren't there. So our growth right now is focused around getting those participation of manufacturers, of academics, of disability organizations. You know, we've got a lot of accessibility companies and usability companies, and we're almost at the point of snowballing, but we're not quite there yet. But we need to sort of keep growing. So when it comes down to like, well, how do you develop that scoring system? So our model is to pay for the development of standards with oversight of the membership, and then the membership eventually votes on whether to adopt it as a standard. So that's how you can get involved, is to just become a member, a voting member. And what we'll be doing is sharing as the scoring systems are being developed. You know, I give presentations where I say, well, it could be 5-star scale, like we're used to seeing on rating of products. It could be A, B, C, D, E, or A+, B+, D-. Could be a percentage, could be something else. But we don't know. We need to try it out with our members and say, does this work with your current system? And can you implement this? If this became a standard, could you implement this and start using this for the benefit of your clients? And so we go through that process over a period of time where everybody's involved, everybody's engaged. And then at the end of the process, once the developers have finished that, we put it up for the member vote. The developers don't get a say in it. The board doesn't get a say in it. I don't get a say in it. All of our members get a say. They all get the vote up or down. Do we adopt this as an industry consensus standard? And by paying for the development of the standard, going to companies to seek sponsorship for the development of the standard, we can pay people to develop at the pace of a regular project. Most standards in accessibility are done at the pace of the volunteer method. And that's why, you know, WCAG 1 to WCAG 2.0 took more than a decade. So, you know, that's, you see all these announcements. Well, from WCAG 2.1, Steve Faulkner just posted yesterday, WCAG 2.2 is going to be published tomorrow. Well, okay. But 2.1 was quite a while ago, and the government is still working on 2.0, you know, in the US. So,
yeah.
So we're trying to speed up the process, and we're trying to involve everybody. But how will it be done? That's up for the group to decide.
And Chris, I think that's where our partnership comes in as well, because of the work with accessible ICT procurement. So Sharon, you're involved in that as well. So we will be sharing what we learn in our approach for vendor and product assessments of VPAT and things like that. So there will be representatives from OZeWAI with what the work we're doing on that standards committee. So I appreciate that. I'm just going to go to Julia and Rose here about the standards. How would you like to see something like this applied for conferences and events?
Look, it's a really good question. Accessibility for in-person conferences, people think physical, like things like people who use powered chairs or chairs and those sort of things. But, you know, there's a lot of accessibility around neurodiversity that I think is emerging. And that's both a physical and an online thing. But also just in terms of the world post-COVID, there's a lot of vulnerable populations. And one of the benefits of COVID, if we can say that, is that we've become more aware of people who have vulnerabilities in terms of obviously communicable diseases. I don't know if it's a communicable disease. Anyway, COVID. But so then the opportunity that all going online that happened during COVID to then leverage that to making conferences accessible to people who may not be in the physical space as well, and making it as good as the experience for the online attendee as it possibly can be than the in-person attendee. Because the reality being, just from a cost perspective as a business owner, the cost of a conference isn't the catering. The cost of the conference is the content. And so the more that you can make your content, and we do have accessible talks throughout all of our content, and it's, you know, 6 tracks across the whole digital team. The more accessible you make the content, the better it is for people at home. And we don't want to exclude people who physically can't be attending, whether that's through company budgets or that's through they can't fly or they don't want to travel or they can't physically be in Sydney. You want their experience to be as good as the person in person, and you want that content to be as accessible as possible. And those opportunities that came through COVID and online has also helped our in-person people, because we do our talk, we do our questions through chat, not with people holding a microphone. We do have live captioning, so people who are in the room can be on the device on our platform and have that live captioning as it's going. So I've actually forgotten what the question was, but more there's opportunities.
Maybe about the standard, applying the standard to the
standard. Sorry, it's completely irrelevant to what I'm saying, but the standards, you know, it just gives a bit. We do all these things because we think it's important, but as Chris said, everyone should be doing these things, or at least be judged on these things. And so the standard would almost like be a checklist of what you should be doing as a bare minimum, or maybe as a bare maximum. I'm not sure, for people who are consuming your digital conferences and in person as well.
Yeah, I would suggest. I mean, so our focus at the beginning, we got two areas that we're focusing on. One is consumer products, and one is websites, website accessibility. So I could envisage that. For events and conferences, you could say, look, your website scores a B+ on accessibility. Is that acceptable for you? Okay, right? You know, that whatever the scoring system we work at. So it's all about reporting. It's not ticking off the elements. Yeah. It's about how you scored. Yeah. You know, in this conference over here, they scored A+, and then this, you know, my wife doesn't work in accessibility. She works in the world of finance.
Yes.
And I can tell you that if you had a disability and you went to a finance conference, you're out of luck, right? You know, go to an accessibility conference, you expect to have fairly good accessibility. Go to just regular conferences, and no one can give you a score, right? So if you start that process and you say, hey, I actually went through your site and you got an F. Right, or you got 1 star. So that could be a thing. But as for you know, developing new standards in the future, you know, we'll move on to mobile apps and electronic documents. I could see a day where we say, you know, events as a whole, could you create a scoring system for that, and a reporting system? That's easily something that we could add down the line, you know, if there was someone to support that.
So it's kind of like building on the different parts and bringing it together. So Julia, do you want to talk to that about the standards?
Yeah. I think it would be really interesting to see what a sort of star rating system would do for events, because I'm wondering if it would have the effect almost of shaming people in that, they're seeing events with, 4 or 5 stars. And, if they're only getting 1 or 2, would that actually finally make them realize? I mean, Chris, you just said, finance conferences over there are not overly thinking about accessibility, which is ridiculous because, as we know, 20% of the population have a disability, and that's even more when you take into account the maturing population, temporary disabilities, people breaking their legs, and so the fact that conferences like that still don't think about accessibility when they probably at a minimum would have at least 10 to 15% of their delegates do have a disability. So I think it would be very interesting. Events are finally coming around. I've seen a shift also in events lately, which has been good. And yeah, we want it to be more in non-accessible related, I guess, events and conferences. I don't know if everybody knows Dylan Alcott's Ability Fest, I think it's called, which is a music festival he puts on here, specifically, and that's your gold star standard of events. We attempted that this year with the Accessible and Inclusive Tourism Conference. I think we got pretty close.
I think you did.
And
it was really good.
And
that's you said gold star standard, and that's pretty much what we need to actually create. So it's a sort of it's a way of explaining to somebody this is the best, right? Gold star standard, right? But there isn't actually a standard. So absolutely, we need to make that and say these people got a gold star, and these people over here got the wooden spoon.
And it almost needs to be like the building standards. You'd never build a new building with staircases down to a gym without some sort of accessible way. It's just not, it's just unthinkable. And it's almost like we should get to a point where these things are unthinkable to do for a digital product or a website or anything digital.
Yeah. But because right now we have this sort of silly situation where you do have the ramp to get into the gym. But if you go up to the treadmill and you start trying to use the treadmill, and if you're blind, good luck trying to figure out the controls.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, it would be nice to see people move past the minimum. Because as we know, you've got your building regulations and whatever else, and people will do the bare minimum for accessibility, where realistically people should be, reaching for that higher standard. And, because that's where you're going to bring in your customers. Like, businesses are about bringing in and keeping your customers.
Yeah. I remember,
and the highest.
I remember very vividly a conversation I had as one of the interviews I had when I was doing my PhD in Australia. So I was at RMIT University. I went around to different businesses to talk to them about how they respond to accessibility concerns. And someone from a very big stadium complex, I asked them about, well, look, this was 2006, 2007. There's no standard on accessibility for stadiums. And she said, well, we really wouldn't want a standard. We'd kind of be opposed to a standard. And I said, well, why? And she said, well, because we go better than the standard. We want to be world-class at everything we do. So we want to have the best customer service. We want to have the best experience. We want to have the best food, the best events. So everything about us is the best. Accessibility, we want to be the best. We go to our competitors and we check out what they're doing, and we do better because we want to be better than them. And I was like, well, that's a refreshing sort of answer. Yeah. Very surprising. We don't often hear answers like that. But that was an argument against having a standard. But I think that if they had a standard, they would understand the need.
And they'd use it for their marketing,
wouldn't they?
At
least do them. Yeah, it's good marketing for them, and it's a good attitude. But that's the key thing. I mean, I think that the mistake, the misconception that I deal with a lot when I'm talking to people about this is that we're pointing out how bad the accessibility is of various products. Really, we're trying to support the companies that want to do well. They need a means to say I'm doing well, right? So one of the analogs that we have is car crash test ratings, right? Here in the US, it's a 5-star government rating of how safe your car is, right? And I know that there's some debate in Australia about how that standard goes across and how you rate the safety of Australian cars, but it used to be that you didn't sell cars based off of safety, right? You sold cars off of how they looked and how they made you feel, and it was a lifestyle thing. Now, if you watch car commercials, right, it's all about inclusion, right, and diversity and safety, right? Safety. So everything that we see gets mentioned. And what it means is that once you put a scoring system, everyone is, again, clamoring to say, we're better than our competition. And we just want to facilitate that. And it's a pity that we haven't been able to facilitate that up to this point, because we haven't all gotten together to decide what the scoring system is. So that's all we need to do. Yeah.
No, that's great. Look, we've got about 4 minutes left. I did just want to get to this a question that Kylie had, and I'm happy if everyone's happy to stay on a little bit longer if you want to. But during your careers, what is the most outlandish justification for ignoring accessibility you've heard, and how did you challenge this justification? I'm not sure if you could tell us that in a kind of quick minute response. Julia, did you want to go first for that one?
I don't think of anything specific. I mean, it's usually budget, room. To be honest, people don't don't care because they don't value the, well, I guess it's societal. We don't really value disabled people in as much as we do other consumers. Yeah, I guess they don't think the market, like our spending power is big enough to worry about, which is ridiculous because the numbers for the disposable income is phenomenal. Yeah, I can't think of, look, I'm sure there's something over the years that I've experienced, but it's mostly money, because it's usually the last thing on a to-do list of a business. It's like, we'll do all this, oh yeah, and accessibility. And as we all know, the later you build it in your planning process, the more expensive it becomes.
Yeah, exactly. Rose, have you had anything in your career?
Look, well, this is just an analogy, I suppose. So I broke my leg and I was traveling, and I got an accessible room, but it was a 60-meter walk from the desk to the room that was accessible, which might be fine if you're in a wheelchair, but when you're on crutches and you're overseas by yourself and trying to do these things, and then it brings me into mind that the real focus on accessibility that came around digitally very early was around buying tickets to the Sydney Olympics, and it was very much the first thing that you found on the search page for many years about Sydney Olympic tickets was a court case from someone who was low vision or blind who couldn't buy the tickets because the website wasn't accessible. And then it sort of became, well, you can ring up this number and we can read all these things out to you. And it was like a booklet this thick with all your Olympic tickets. Those sort of notions of like, we've complied, there's a solution, but it's not a good solution. And as we've seen the shift of all business now is digital business, like shopping, everything is, all products are virtually digital now. The commercial aspect of that billions of dollars that Julia's talked about across the board with people with disability, 20% of people, if they're missing out, is such a huge thing for your bottom line as a business. So hopefully there is a shift coming around, just even if it's a commercial imperative or a commercial decision, a shift coming to ensure inclusion for all people with digital products and the online world.
And
And then if
think
you,
ticket. Oh,
sorry,
sorry,
Julia, go on.
I was just going to say, I think tickets are one of the biggest banes of people with disabilities' life. So, you know, we have all these wonderful digital technology now, but 99% of the time, if I want a ticket to something, I have to ring up because I need a wheelchair seat.
Mm-hmm.
I got very excited. I was able to book one online with the Art Centre the other day. So, and Village Cinemas also do it, but pretty much everyone else, you have to ring up on the phone. Depending on if it's a theatre, they will usually just let it go to voicemail and they have to ring you back. So, you know, the technology is there. I don't know how it's not being better utilised with tickets. Sorry, that's just a little bugbear of mine. I thought I'd throw in.
No, that's great. And Chris, what's your response to that question about the justification for ignoring accessibility and how you challenged it?
I love the question, Carly. Thank you. I could almost write a book on this. I've heard all manner of outlandish reasons, having worked as a consultant and academic in government. But let me tell you about the worst I heard, and I heard it twice in two very different situations. So both from mobile phone manufacturers, right? So the first time I was doing my PhD in Australia, and I was talking to people who did the mobile phone, and I was the interviewer. So I had my little clipboard, and I'm sitting down chatting to people about how they're dealing with accessibility. And this guy from the manufacturer just said, "They're not our demographic," right? And as a researcher, I had to sit there with a straight face, feeling almost sick about this response. And I had to keep a straight face and keep on with the interview just to collect the data, right? The second time was about a year later, and I was at a conference in London, on an inclusive design conference. And they had invited, I think it was, I want to say Motorola, one of the design heads of Motorola. And he was part of this session, and they invited 3 accessibility experts to come and sit on the stage and to be part of the Q&A afterwards. So I got invited up because whoever was supposed to be there didn't make it, and they were sort of scrambling around like, Chris, you've been around for a while. You're the academic guy. Could you go up and you be one of these people? Okay, I'll do that. So all through this guy's presentation from Motorola, there was nothing about talking phones. You know, it's, we're inclusive this, we're inclusive that, we're a lovely company. And then polite round of applause at the end. And there's somebody at the front who's blind said, "Are you going to make your phones talk?" And I said, "Yeah, are you going to make your phones talk? You're here at an inclusion conference full of people with disabilities, full of people who are blind, and we haven't heard anything about, are you going to make your phones talk? Why are your phones talking? They can talk." And he said, "They're just not our demographic."
And there were people in the room who asked it, right?
I can guarantee you that even to this day, everybody who was there probably remembers that interaction and remembers nothing about what the other guy said. He just flatly said, "This is not our demographic." And so, you know, it wasn't until Apple came along to the mobile phone space quite late in 2008, 2009, and they said, "Oh, we've got a way to make it talk, and we're not constrained by what all these other manufacturers did." The other manufacturers, all of them knew that they had the technology that they could make them talk, but it was in the American legislation, it said where readily achievable. So they all kind of said, look, if none of us does this, it's not readily achievable, right? And when the Apple iPhone came along, they weren't part of the club. They're just like, oh, well, let's make it talk. Within a year, all of the other phones were talking. So Motorola, Samsung, Nokia, they were all talking. Why? Because the excuse had been taken away, right? If you have an environment where people can make excuses, they make excuses. That's as simple as that.
It comes back to the standards then, you know, that's going to help us to avoid those excuses coming through. Look, it's just been such a brilliant session today. Hopefully everyone on the call has enjoyed this, and we will be putting it up on our YouTube channel. Please help us support OZeWAI by becoming a member. We have a advocacy level of $50 for a year. And we can be, we're going to be running these every month. And particularly as new members join, we'll be asking them to be on our panel. So we're supporting our members as well. And we'll be running more of the partnerships ones as they grow. And look, really, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much, Chris. Looking forward to more work with you in the StandartARI. Thanks so much, Rose. Can't wait to catch up with you in Web Directions in a few weeks' time. If you haven't got your tickets, OZeWAI gets a discount for tickets as well. It's all on our website. And Julia, obviously, there's still lots of work that we're doing together, and we just love that we have a wonderful agreement. We even share costs for some of this online web platform so that we're not paying for it as separate, not-for-profit. So look, thank you everyone for all your time, and thank you for everyone on the call. And please join us in November. We're trying to bring together people who are accessibility SMEs internal to organizations, and how what kind of questions they get, what kind of careers they're looking for. So we're really keeping that theme going. So really appreciate your time. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Cheers. Cheers, Brian.
Thanks.